Welcome to SIR Studios, Inside the Issue. Today's guest is Matthew Fiander, whose story, Still Life at Chambersburg Applebee's, is featured in the spring 2024 issue of Southern Indiana Review. Matthew Fiander's fiction has appeared in Story Magazine, Mid-America Review, Zone 3, Willow Springs, the Massachusetts Review, South Carolina Review, and Recon Review, among other places. He's also written for the New York Times, PopMatters, and other outlets. His debut novel, Ringing in Your Ears, was published by Main Street Rag in 2023. He currently lives and works in North Carolina. Matt, welcome to Inside the Issue.
Hey, Casey, how are you? Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Appreciate it. So to start off, maybe do you want to read just a little bit from the story for us?
Sure. Yeah, I'll read the very opening of Still Life at Chambersburg Applebee's. Joe found Eve online and her profile images, pale skin against dark leather, deep red lipstick, some shadowed room secreted away from the world, conspired with the language in her profile, submission, domination, pain, release, to thrill him. Things he had never done before, adventures, travels into space he and his wife would never explore together. The bar at the Chambersburg Applebee's felt like an inconspicuous enough location to meet. Despite the restaurant's unnatural darkness, he recognized Eve immediately, already on a bar stool, sliding a martini back and forth in front of her, leaning in, considering it. She was a woman who ordered martinis from the Applebee's bar. Joe expected her to be dressed sleek and sexy. Instead, she wore jeans and an oversized flannel shirt. Her hair twisted down into a loose side ponytail. No discernible makeup. Out of uniform, he guessed. Joe was hurt initially. He wore a sport coat, his wife only vaguely curious when he left the house. Getting dolled up for the produce aisle, she asked as she handed him a grocery list. She added, "Don't forget milk." Curiosity gone. Otto, Joe said when he sat down, his nom de guerre for this Applebee's encounter. He added, from the internet. Eve, she said, from Scranton.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that. I love that line, the Joe saying, from the internet. It just speaks volumes about his, how uncomfortable he is in the situation and how literally out of his element he is. That's funny. So can you tell us a little about the story? Maybe give us a quick summary. What's going on in it?
Sure. Yeah. So Joe is a man in over his head, as we see here, but he has kind of snuck away to try and meet with this woman, Eve, who he found her website online, and she performs certain services. And he's considering whether or not he's going to try this out, and he's not quite sure how far he's gone. I think he and his wife are a little distant from one another, but really he's just kind of gone off on a sort of bad adventure is really the best way. He's at an Applebee's making some bad decisions. It's really the big thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the touch of making an Applebee's is like just like perfect, right? That it's an Applebee's of all places. And just the way that she's drinking and a fancy martini, and a little bit later in the story she sends a drink back because it's not to her liking. It was just like a really nice touch that it's an Applebee's. I like just that we've got this guy who he's about to potentially make I think we would say a bad decision, but it feels entirely believable, right? That these two people, this husband and wife, they haven't fallen out of love or anything, but it's just like things have changed, and he's about to potentially embark on something that I think would be disastrous to his marriage. But I don't know, it feels authentic, which I really appreciate. So where did this? Tell me about the genesis of this story. Like, what kind of where did it come from, or what was sort of driving you, or what were those initial sort of initial spark for it, I guess?
Yeah, so the Applebee's in this is a very specific Applebee's in my mind, believe it or not. I grew up in Massachusetts, but I went to college in North Carolina. So driving back and forth, we'd always split up the drive, and we drove down I-81 to avoid 95 on the tolls. And we inevitably would stop at Chambersburg. It was just kind of like a little past halfway. And it's sort of southern Pennsylvania, I think. And it was just like a good place to stop. There was a hotel right off the thing. And really, there was a grocery store, there was an Applebee's, and I think a Papa John's. Not much else. It was just a very quiet stretch, and there was nothing else there. And so it was just weirdly always stuck me because I just always imagine places like that. You know, you're sitting at the Applebee's bar or whatever, and like, who knows what's going on around you? You know, part of the sort of fun thing for me working on this story was just imagining the other people at the bar having no clue this was going on. My hope is that Joe feels paranoid in the story that people are listening, but as usual, you know, no one ever is, right? Everyone's always just paying attention to their own stuff. So that was where it started. You know, it's just like, all right, this super basic place to be. You don't think anything too scandalous could be happening there, and then across the bar from you, there's this guy that's really, for no really good reason, about to make a catastrophic mistake. And you know, it's happening this is the afternoon. It's not nighttime, it's lunchtime. And so that was where it sort of started for me, and then it changed quite a bit, I think, the more I got into it.
Yeah, like I said before, there's something about the Applebee's that makes it perfect, just because, you know, not to be rude about Applebee's or anything, but you know, the Applebee's bar on an afternoon, like that's a particular place and people, right? Or I guess it maybe has more to say about this town, that's the only place to get a drink on an afternoon. But I don't know. I just think it's a really just the perfect choice. Even not knowing that this was a real place, you know, but it just seems it was really deft touch. So in addition to that, I think one of the things that I really marveled at in the story, you know, upon first reading it and all the times I've reread it, and again, reading it in preparation for this, I think you managed moving into backstory, in and out of backstory, really smoothly. So, you know, as I'm sure you know, and lots of people know, you know, a really common mistake in a lot of stories is to have, you know, we get shuffled into backstory too soon, right? We're introduced to a situation and then we get kicked back to backstory, and we're, you know, as readers, we're like, no, the drama's in what's happening in the now. And we move back into backstory, you know, not right away in the story, of course, but pretty early. But it works so well contextually because Eve asks him about a safe word, right? And you know, Job already, it's established that he's paranoid and that he's you know, approaching this situation with some trepidation, but still not sure if he's going to go through with it. And he's definitely the guy who, as we find out, has like a Googled safe words, right? He's thought way too much about safe words. And so we move into backstory because it's natural. It's like we move into his mind and into this backstory because that's exactly what he would be doing, right? It doesn't feel like we're moving in order to provide us information. It feels like we're moving in because that's the space to go in the story. And I thought that was really well done. And then you do this other nice thing too, where, because the backstory goes for I don't know, in the magazine, it's going to go for probably, you know, 2 pages or so. And but there's 2 points in it that you remind us that that Joe is present in the bar, right? There's a moment on my page 40 where we get this just little bit of exposition. Eve blankly watched him check his phone, like, oh yeah, he's still thinking, we're still sitting in the bar next to Eve. And that, you know, that's just that nice little moment that we're like, you know, we're reminded, if we'd forgotten where we are. And then it happens again at the bottom of 41 when we get brought back to so not read, the opposite of a safe word. And we're brought back to like, oh yeah, this is all of this backstory stems from the safe word. And I thought that was really handled really well, because in a lesser story, it wouldn't have landed, right? It would have,
sure. Yeah.
I think it would have, I've seen plenty of stories where it doesn't work this way. And that was, I think, exceptionally well done.
Thank you. It's hard, right? It's hard to know where backstory goes because you need it, right? Like, and it's really hard to just be in present in the present action and just have that do the work and not get any history in it. I've tried many times. It's really hard to do, but it's also hard to figure out where the backstory goes naturally. I think an early version of this was in first person, and it just still didn't quite. There's something about that didn't work. Like I don't imagine Joe consciously dipping into these things as much, or in a sort of like at top of mind, I can admit I'm thinking about these things, but it's always there for him. And so and I feel I think a lot about memory when I'm writing anyway. I'm sure lots of people do, but and writing as sort of not even just like almost mimicking memory more than representing it. And I think I was hoping that this would kind of be how the memory would work. It'd be like, okay, the glass takes him back to here, or this, thinking about safety words takes him back to here, which then takes him to red, which then takes him back, that sort of that island hopping that can happen, at least for me, when I'm remembering things. It's never, I think one of the hard things with backstory is if it's too linear, if it's too fleshed out, then you say like, well, okay, wait, where did we go? How are we this in depth? And it's hard to do if you're that close to the character in the narrative, first person or close third.
Yeah, that reminds me of you're talking about that kind of that island hopping, or that kind of transition into the deep past. Reminds me of, I mean, it's so famous, it's a cliche, but like the way Tyvek handles Pet Milk. Right? That it's the swirling of the milk which takes him back, and then we see the swirling in the painting and the cloud. It's just this kind of like how did he do that, right? But it works. First person, that's interesting, because if you remember, how did the story end then? Because to me, the beauty of this ending is, we don't know exactly what Joe's thinking, right? In first person, we'd probably have to know, I don't know, there'd be maybe some level of self-awareness that I don't know would work as well.
Yep.
So
yeah, I think that was part of the reason I don't think I could figure out how to do that. And even there were things late in this revision process that had kind of hung around that needed these just moments of certainty, like this moments where he's saying like, I know why I'm doing this, and it didn't land for me. I think certainty is really hard to pull off anyway. For me, I'm sort of more interested in people that don't know why they're doing stuff, and people that still feel a little lost and are trying to figure it out. And yeah, in that first person, it was just really hard to figure out even where it was going to go. I think I don't remember him walking out and then coming back in. There's that, he's the thing I could never figure out with first person is how he's going to be confronted with this, and then what he's going to do, right? Because I think that's part of it. At the end, he does have to be confronted with this bad decision. He has to know it's a bad decision. He has to know he's wrong, and then what, right? And I think the shifting it to third at least gave me the ability to do it. I'm sure there are probably better writers that can do it in first, but this is the way it worked for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's absolutely the right choice, because even in first person, there's the inevitable, like the guy telling us the story knows how it turned out,
right,
as he's telling it. And here, we don't. And there's something there's something about that in this particular this story that third, I think, works really well. Two more things I really like. I mean, I liked everything in the story, but two more things I really liked. Where did you, and this has something to do with the Genesis bit, or where the story came from. Where did the still life things come from? Because throughout the story we get, obviously it's the title, Still Life in Chambersburg Applebee's, and throughout he kind of thinks like it's like a thing that he does in his life. Like he witnesses himself doing something or experiencing something, and he says, for example, still life with Google search for useful safe word, still life with unrecognizable marriage, still life with dominatrix at Applebee's. There's another one like still life with like cleared browser history or something like, so where did that, was that something that worked out early in the process, or was that something that you discovered?
I think once I knew that, I think it was something that helped me figure out the story could work, if that makes sense. So I think in terms of like it being a story that existed and I was going to keep going with it, probably happened pretty early. I can't remember if I figured out he painted or sort of was a fledgling artist before or after that. But in all honesty, in some ways, it was a crutch to get me through the story. It was one of these things you can kind of, let's throw a still life in there, and then
Yeah.
you end up having to peel a bunch of them out. But I think it ended up working because that's, I think when I started the story, like a lot of things, I wanted it to be funnier than it ended up being. I think there's hopefully still a couple funny moments, but there's a lot of pathos that comes in, I think. And it was like, let's put this guy in this absurd situation. But once you get into a story like that, you have to figure out who he is, and you have to figure out, why do we want to pay attention? This is a guy who's going to fail at what he's doing at an Applebee's, right? Like, who cares? Why do we want to pay attention to that? And I think in the end, that was the question I was trying to chase down. And once I found art sort of quasi in his background, but he's like a lot of people. He thought he was going to be an artist, and then life turned him in another direction, and he works and his wife works, and part of the problem is she became very successful working, and he kind of stagnated, but he also wasn't painting. And so it opens up all these things about, I think the central question, I think, for Joe is like, how does he recognize and then deal with disappointment? Mm-hmm. That's sort of where he's at, right? And so his only reference to this life as an artist that he sort of imagines is, these still life. So I can make these moments in my, sarcastically or not, I can make these moments in my life pieces of art.
Yeah, no, and I think that the fact that he is an artist is another one of those kind of like perfect touches or happy accident if that's how it turned out. But it's like, oh yeah, if he's an artist, that is like he logically would see the world like an artist, and he and he's you get the sense that that he is kind of poking fun at himself with some of these, like the absurdity that he's got himself in. And that's just another one of those, I can imagine working that out and being like, got it. He's the painter. And then like, those are those moments we live for when we're writing it. We stumble upon something and it's a proof that the story's smarter than we are, right?
Yeah. Because it's almost self-awareness, right? Like he's poking fun at himself, but it doesn't enact any change. He keeps doing the same stuff. So he's like, it's like, again, recognition, but not reconciliation, right? Like he can recognize this disappointment hanging around, but he can't really give it a name. He can't really do anything with it. And so he ends up at this bar.
Yeah. So the last thing that I'm interested in hearing about too is how sort of when and how the spinning glass image, I guess for lack of a better word, comes in, because like in the opening, the second paragraph of the story, Eve's described as sliding a martini glass back and forth, which isn't the same as spinning, but it kind of introduces us to that. And then a few pages in, which is one of the places where we have a little signal to backstory, which is another really kind of smart thing. Eve spins the martini glass. This is the bottom of my page 42. She spun the martini glass by its stem in tight, quick circles of waning patience. Carrie did this too, which is the wife. Carrie did this too, but with casual charm. And then in Nashville years ago, she spun her watered down old fashioned, and we move into a moment, a really happy but also like erotically charged moment for him and his wife that he's gone back to, that he's kind of wistful about, right? Like where did it, like we were this, where did it go? Why did it change? And then I guess like the rule of threes, right? We come back at the very end, and we get the spinning glass. So Joe decides, or maybe not how conscious it is, but does not go with Eve, and goes back into the bar, and he tries to spin his glass, and it won't, because the bar top is wavy or sticky or something. So where did that image come from, and how did it develop, I guess, into a really central part of the story?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I'm always looking to do in revision, especially, is like the little manner or the little detail. Peter Orner, who's one of my favorite short story writers, I saw him read a couple years ago from his last collection, Maggie Brown, I think, and other stories. And he read this story about, it's called Two Lawyers, and it's about these guys who are sort of work friends, and then one of them abruptly dies, and there's lots going on around that. But there's this scene where the friend from work meets the deceased man's wife, and they're standing outside his hospital room. They've just found out he died, and then there's a line about the nurses hustled by in sensible shoes. And it's this little detail. It has almost nothing to do with what's happening, and it just flings, it's like, wait, is he noticing that? Is that just the world moving around them? It's this little detail that does all this work. There's another, I was reading an Elizabeth Talent story the other day, and I don't remember the name of it, but there's just like someone just touches their watch in the passenger seat of a car, and it just does all this stuff. And I'm always looking for that. What's the little detail? And I think the first one I had was the spinning glass in the backstory. I think like having, when they're in Nashville and she's spinning the glass, and I thought, okay, I can sort of, what if I bring that into the present action? They're at a bar, let's see how that works. And finding a way to distinguish the two, that Eve's not charmed by him. She's not interested. She's and less so as the conversation goes on, right? And then it just gave me another thing, at the end, he doesn't go with her, but he doesn't go home. And, again, does he recognize disappointment? Does he know what he's even doing? That when he goes out into the parking lot, he has this exchange with a guy who has a small child who's sort of goofing off in the car, and it's delusion, right? Like essentially he's trying to connect with this guy, but they don't have the connection he thinks. He doesn't have a child. He doesn't even really know that he wants one. And so all this is swirling around, and he goes back in and thought, what can I get him to do? And like, well, if he can't even spin the glass, then where are you going? So it just started off as one of those, just like, I just like getting those little manners instead of having people sort of think something, just have them do something that we can sort of noodle on a little bit. And then, I just was able to find those other places to put it, and it ended up doing. Then it's again happy discovery. It ended up doing more work than I thought it would in the story.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I try to tell students all the time is that focusing on image, concrete objects and images and concrete actions, not or anyway, things that characters can do, accrue symbolic meaning or symbolic, maybe not thematic meaning as the story progresses, but you can't force it. You can't be like, I'm going to put a spinning glass in this story and that's going to symbolize, it's like never works that way. It's always just that's an action that I really like. And oh, wait, it might be able to carry a little more weight for me. But I mean, I've never met a writer who talks about it in terms of that being like the intent at the beginning. Like you said, you're looking for those moments, but you're not looking to like force them into the story.
Yeah. For me, it's like, honestly, it's just happy when I find them, because it just like, I like the line, right? I like writing the sentence, she's spun the glass with, quiet charm or whatever it is, like just getting that line on the page is just like one of those little Hot Wheels, things that keeps me writing. So it's really functional for me in that way.
You mentioned Peter Orner in that same collection, and I think it may be those same characters. Is that the same guys? Like, is it like Gus? I think where there's several like little kind of that collection's full of like a bunch of little flash pieces, but there's like 3 of them, and I only remember this because I've used them in class where it's these 2 guys meeting at the diner 3 different times. And I'm pretty sure it's the same character as the one that dies, but he's a master of that small stuff, man. Like that guy, he's somebody that we should all be reading. He should be famous. Like
it's unreal.
He's not famous, but he should be like, that guy's great.
I mean, and it is, they're flash pieces, but the scope of them is unbelievable. And it's all that detail and syntax. Like he will give you something, and it's a very everyday moment, and just the way, the order of the language, the tone of it, like the music he's got going there there's no one that writes like him that I've ever found, and it's pretty amazing.
I mean, what I love about that too is he's able to capture in 2 guys eating, tuna melts or whatever they're having, like without telling us, he shows us that these guys have been doing this for like 50 years.
Yep.
And he doesn't explain how they know each other. They're like talking about something, they're having this conversation that's been ongoing. We're only getting this glimpse of it, but he's able to show us that this is habitual without telling us every Wednesday for the last 10 years. Like, he doesn't, that's like, he's definitely somebody that writers should be reading if they're not.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this story switching, having an early draft being first person. Any other like revision challenges that this story faced?
Balance on a lot of levels, as always, but I think the hardest thing is like, you got to find a way to get the reader to stick with this guy, because he's on his face, he's dishonest, he's not a good person, really, at least in this moment in his life. He's not doing the right thing, and he's not really thinking of anyone else in the situation. Like even Eve, who's in front of him, he doesn't get it. He's and she's pretty clear, like, you're not gonna tourist your way through this whole thing. And he's like, well, oh yeah, okay. So he's not likable, he's not doing the right thing, and outside of that, he's not like I think the things you tend to latch on to characters is like, if they're really good at something, so then even if they're bad, this is how most detective shows, right? They're horrible human beings. They can't live day to day, but they can solve a crime. So we hang with them, and they're so clever. He's not particularly clever. He's not good. He's not trying to be good in this moment. And his grievances are fairly, I think anyway, sort of petty. And so how do you get people to hang with him? And I think it was, again, figuring out that notion of disappointment and how to make that feel real. I think, he and his wife took a job as teachers, and their whole thing was like, we're going to work, and then we have summers off so we can go travel, which of course underestimates just how difficult teaching is. But also, it's a common, they have a common understanding of their life, and then it changes for her. She moves up the ladder, she becomes an administrator, she finds purpose, and he's stuck. And so I think, especially now, think about since the pandemic and everything, I think disappointment is a big thing that people feel and don't talk about, and we don't have common language about it. And it's this place that's become a real sort of touch point for lots of different divisions and difficulties. And so I needed to find a way to balance that. Like, I couldn't just have him just be absurd. I couldn't, because that's, I think a lot of stories like this, the early draft, it's like you lean into the problem and then try and sort of smooth it out from there. And that's what I did. And coming out of it early, I was like, okay, there's a couple, oh, Zsa Zsa Gabor, that's a kind of funny line, but why are we here? If we're gonna eavesdrop on an Applebee story, why wouldn't it be the one across the bar? Why this one? And so trying to find a little bit of balance, not to make him sympathetic, not to make us like be like, I get it, Joe, this is a good idea, but just to be like, okay, you can understand how a person will get to this point, and maybe he'll pull out of it.
I think that last little bit there's key that you said, right? That the story allows him to make this mistake, right? And it's a mistake that, while we're being our best selves, we're like, no, that could never happen. We're like, but like, there's something about this guy that strikes me as kind of tragic, like small scale tragic, right? That his life was going with his wife the way that they wanted, and the bit about possibly having a child, they had never really talked about it, but the story gives us the impression that it was something that was still on the table for him. And when his wife takes the administrative job, that's kind of removed. So no, there's something about the guy that struck me as tragic, because if we remove this act that he commits here, it's kind of through nobody's fault that this relationship is kind of ended up the way that it is. And I don't know, I think that's, to me, that was the thing that kept me kept me engaged with this guy because, you know, he didn't strike me as like a fundamentally bad person. It was just sort of like a guy who life has changed, as you said, in ways that he didn't anticipate. And, you know, his action is what we are like, oh man, don't do that, you know. But also, yeah, do that because we want to see what happens in the story.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. I say this a lot to my students, just that idea that you know the story doesn't judge him in any way, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he does this thing that you know we're probably most sort of people we would hope would think like, nah, don't do this, man. This is a, you know, a morally or ethically, you know, bad thing you're doing. But the story just lets him do it, and you know, there's none of those kind of finger wagging sort of moments in the story where you know the writer comes in and makes it sure that makes it sure that we feel disappointed in Joe for his decision.
Sure.
And I mean, obviously you're too good of a writer for that, but I like that the story allows Joe to be Joe and allows us to sort of witness his predicament, and that's it, you know.
Yeah. And like I said, I didn't want to bail him out.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to, I think like making a character just to condemn them seems like, I mean, just an odd exercise anyway, but just it's hard to pull off anyway as a writer. And but yeah, I mean, he's worried that everything's passing him by, of course, and then he makes this mistake, and well, the world kind of just moves on. I mean, like Eve's not buying into this. His wife may or may not sort of have something to say about it, because he's not going to get home on time, so there's going to be something to talk about. And so but everyone else is moving forward, and he's sitting at the bar and has to sort of decide. And I think that's if the specifics of the story and the specifics of his mistake are not universal, certainly like the headspace he's in, you get this sounds probably heavier than it is, but you get older and options change, and some options fall away, right? And it's just part of living, and it can be hard to face, it can be easy to face. You can be like, oh yeah, I can't do that anymore, I didn't really want to anyway. Or say like, oh yeah, it turns out I'm not gonna, you come across these sort of bumps in the road as you age, just naturally, not out of mistake, not out of anything else. And so yeah, I think that part hopefully gives him a little bit of relatability, so then you watch him make a mistake, and instead of being like, you're just kind of like, oh yeah, like, come on. Yeah.
So you mentioned Peter Orner, but any other writers that you kind of come back to, or ones that early on in your writing were did something for you, or maybe they still do or not, but so writers or books that feel like touchstones for you, or any that you come back to.
Yeah, I have visual aids for
Awesome. Even better.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this question ahead of time, and like Barry Hannah and Airships is there's that line from Testimony of Pilot, the whole lying memory, the whole lying opera of it is killing me now. I think probably I'm thinking about that in some way anytime I write something. And it's funny, I'm talking about disappointment in this story. I feel like Barry Hannah's characters have accepted disappointment in a lot of ways. It's just kind of, the same come down for everything. And so what do you do, if you're gonna live in rock bottom? And I just think his stories can be harsh on one level, but then so empathetic on others. And then the writing is just so exciting to me. It's sort of open and free and willing to sort of make mistakes, but it almost never does, because his syntax is so good and all that stuff. But yeah, Joy Williams is that way for me. I come back to a lot of her stories. Is Taking Care is the collection I probably read most often, but she's just really good at I don't know that I always try and pull this off. I don't know that it always happens in my own work, but I love stories that make things every day seem strange. And Joy Williams is one of the best ones at that. You see people just kind of like lost in and again, a very sort of seemingly relatable situation, but the perspective and the language used and the images conjured just make it so different. So those are the big story writers. In terms of novelists, James Welsh and Winter in Blood is like, I probably read that once a year at least. And I used to teach it, when I was teaching students more. I taught it all the time, and it's just a beautiful story. And you talk about backstory, capital B backstory, like history works its way into the cracks of that, and you have a sort of lost and confused narrator sort of working his way through things, and it's pretty amazing. And then there's lots of other ones. Robert Olmsted's another big writer for me.
I read it's been a very long time, but I read Winter in the Blood and when I was at Nebraska, and it was in like a plains lit class. That was my first encounter with him, and yeah, that's one of those books that I don't think it's read as much anymore outside of like really specific contexts. Yeah.
I think Penguin put a new edition out a couple of years ago, and so that maybe gave it a bit of a boost.
One of the ones that has like a critical intro or like a retrospective introduction or something like that to that one.
Yeah, it was like a Penguin Classics edition, and I think I can't remember who did the intro, but yeah.
So I mean, maybe on top of James Welch, any other writers that we should be reading more of, and also Peter Horner, which we already talked about. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Honestly, I wonder how widely read even like Barry Hannah and Joy Williams are anymore. I don't know. I would imagine they're read among writers, but anybody else?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's I was thinking about this question ahead of time, and it's like, well, in my little corner of social media, we're all reading it, but outside of that, especially if you think about short stories, it's like, well, how many are out there? But I want to be able to pronounce it right. Marie Ndiaye, I think is how you say her last name. I may be getting that wrong, but she's a beautiful novelist. Her latest book is Vengeance in Mine, which is really great. But my favorite is called That Time of Year. And again, it's that she is really good at digging into the interiority of her characters and just kind of like psychology as action. Like the stories move even if nothing's happening. It's really sort of remarkable. And yeah, I can't, she does stories and stuff too, and she's written a couple of memoirs, but her novels are really, really outstanding.
Cool. I'm not familiar with that writer, so that's good.
Yeah. And then I have more books. This is Here in the Dark, which is a collection of stories by Megan Lucas, and just a great writer, a great story writer. So propulsive, I go back to the stories and I can't figure out, they're active, they move forward. There's lots of sort of action going on, but still so much great characterization, so much beautiful language, just this real great balance of the two.
What press was that? I think I've seen that cover before.
Yeah, that Shotgun Honey, who is a pretty great indie press. They do a lot of sort of crime related fiction, gritlit sort of stuff like that. Cool. But they got a lot of good stuff coming out. And yeah, Megan's one of the great writers out there working now.
That's another writer I'm not familiar with. That's great. That was the whole goal of asking that question, is so we can spread the good word about good stuff out there.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now? If you don't mind talking about it.
Not at all. Yeah. So I had a novel come out last year, Ringing in Your Ears. So I've been I'm just sort of winding down the initial promotional push for that, which is nice. Now I get to work on some new things. So I've started about a third of a way, maybe, through a new novel that's been sort of tugging at me for a while, which is nice. But of course, in classic, at least my process fashion, now that I'm working on a novel, I've been starting writing short stories. I'm distracting myself from the large project. But yeah, so the novel's I'm not even quite sure what to say about it yet, but it's kind of.
That's okay. You don't have to. I know it's hard. I've talked about things and I'm like, I shouldn't have done that, because it I don't know, it feels like you're, I don't know, there's something, I don't know, Hemingway said something about that, the idea of don't talk about it because you don't have to write it, but just that feeling of, I'm always afraid of talking it out and be like, that idea is stupid. Now that I hear it out loud, that's a terrible, and then like psyching yourself out.
Yeah.
Cool, man. So it's great. We can people can check out your novel. And I'll have like social media and website stuff on the description, so people can follow you there and find links to your work. It's been great talking to you. I appreciate it. I love hearing about I'm kind of digging into these stories, and we read them so many times, and when I hear the writers talk about them, it just opens up in this really cool way that's it's exciting. I want to reread it again now, and knowing some of this stuff. Let's see if I can figure out here's where what problems you might have run into in first person or something. It's kind of fun to peek behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Everybody can read Still Life at Chambersburg Applebee's in the spring 24 issue of SIR. And you can go to usi.edu/SIR to find out how to get a copy. And I'll have the link for that in the description as well. So thank you again, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Casey, thank you so much.
All right. See you everybody on the next one.